Hey guys, welcome to book review 124, I believe. Today I am going to be reviewing Back Frayed by Colin Wright. You can see the picture. Well, anyway, Colin is a world traveler, minimalist, I'd say philosopher in a way that travels the world and spends various time or amounts of time, anywhere from a few months to nearly a year, but never really any longer than that, and kind of continually moves. And so this book is about his time in the Philippines, specifically about his time in Mayuyao. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Boracay, the famous uh, beach resort, beach uh, island that's famous for its beaches in the Philippines. And he really compares and contrasts the two. He really enjoys Mayuyao, partially because of his personal preference for climate. Um, some people really like that kind of steamy beach weather, um, vibe, tropical vibe. But at the same time, it can be very draining to people that aren't used to the humidity, that actually kind of have like an instinct to be productive on a daily basis. Whereas Colin found Mayuyao, which is in the highlands of central Luzon, much cooler, but also sort of uh, a more relaxed atmosphere, but a more relaxed atmosphere that, in its sort of slower pace of the larger society, or the larger town, if you will, allowed him to be productive within that environment. Whereas sort of the kind of um, hectic but not producing anything lifestyle of Boracay, he really found sort of oppressive. Now, things that I liked about the book, I feel that Colin, among the many among the many writers that I've read the books of, particularly travel writers, really does a good job of explaining why we travel, as well as kind of covering a variety of topics beyond just sort of the very narrow spectrum of what's going on, sort of in the environment. As I mentioned from the top, uh, he's sort of a very philosophical. He focuses on world trends, be that on like how SIM cards and cell phones work in other countries versus the United States. Be that how a cell phone tower in one very kind of remote, semi-impoverished region, that being Mayuyao. I'll explain more about the Mayuyao and Boracay in a second. Kind of uh, bring modern life into a corner of the world that you would have never thought would have. Um, and what are some other things? Yeah, he talks about his philosophy of minimalism, which is kind of in how society kind of encourages us to own things, and to own things that don't necessarily provide us happiness. And one thing it's specifically fighting is kind of conspicuous consumption, or consumption where you're not really kind of, there's no purpose behind the consumption, where you're just kind of consuming for the sake of consumption rather than to really better your life. And it kind of brings that into why he travels again, those kind of things. Uh, let's see, what else does he talk about? Well, he talks about the ants. I remember that about Miyuya. I did read this book about 3 or 4 months ago, so I'm not gonna quite remember everything. Um, it talks about why you start walking. Uh, you know, uh, all sorts of different philosophical facts. Well, I guess I should talk a little bit about the two places that he visits, because that's really kind of the crux of if not all of this book, at least the reason why I like these types of books. So Mayuyao is a very old, I'd call it larger than a village but smaller than a city, maybe like a township, that is I think like 3,000 or 4,000 feet in the air, on central Luzon. And although it has a small tourist trade, and will probably expand in the years to come, is largely off the beaten track. Excuse me. Colin mentioned how he had to take a bus, and the sort of obstacles in traveling to this area, be it sort of with landslides that, prevented the roads from being passable, and how it took major delays for him to get into the town. I mentioned the cell phone tower that had just come. Even in poor countries, if you go to the big cities, there's still going to be a lot of infrastructure there. Whereas kind of out in the country, it's much more pastoral, agrarian, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He did describe how, I mentioned that this is the rice terrace area in ancient town, where they just have kind of had a subsistence lifestyle, be it, agriculturally, for thousands of years. And have it being rice and have it being on a hillside, the town, or the people of the town throughout history, have created these very beautiful terraced rice fields. And it's almost sort of like a overwhelmingly green, overwhelmingly very like watered, very lush area. And I should mention that it's cooler, but it does rain quite a bit. He mentioned that almost like on the dot, like on a clock, it would rain at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, he compares this with Boracay, where he said that it's a large expat community of people that get, Filipino wives and girlfriends. And he didn't necessarily poo-poo that in and of itself, which I think would be kind of an easy thing to go after. But he just kind of susses it out why these expat communities aren't necessarily experiencing a country for what it is. It's experience, or for, a country for what it is. They're experiencing a commodity sold by the country to these people, and their bank accounts that they bring with them. Even if it isn't a lot of money, it's still probably a greater amount of money than most Filipinos would have access to. And so everyone talks about how everyone in the Philippines is really nice, and it's generally a true stereotype, and Colin mentioned a few examples of that. But if you're specifically talking about how Filipinos are really nice to you in bars, or expat communities, or just anything that's trying to sell you something, well, that's not really a genuine response, if you will. I guess I feel like I should cover like Mayuyao and just kind of go back and forth a little bit. He went to some cultural heritage festivals in Mayuyao. It just felt like Mayuyao was a lot more open, if you will. A lot more kind of, it's hard to describe the right word, but there was just a lot more pressure to relax in Boracay than there was in Mayuyao. Now, I do have a couple criticisms of the book. Of the book. I feel that Colin very much covers kind of like why larger global social trends are happening. Like I mentioned, like the cell phone, or like the way we form our lives through consumption or minimalism, if you take that point of view, or different philosophical angles, or globalization, or just, there's so much to go into there because it covers quite a bit of it. But all this kind of world interconnectedness And he also talks about very much about his sort of experiences kind of on a day-to-day level. But I really feel that he missed some mid-ground of talking about the lives of people in these communities. Not like to form like a social trend that he saw or to provide examples for a larger social trend. But specifically just their stories and kind of see like where they lead. Like in Miyuyao, he mentioned the, you know, these community festivals that he would go to, or how people would really welcome them or welcome him, excuse me. And these were very interesting, but you know, if he found like somebody interesting among that group that he could kind of follow up through his narrative of the book, rather than kind of have them segmented out into these various topical categories, which kind of, I mean, this is not meant to be insulting, but it seems like the most interesting encyclopedia articles you could ever write. You know, they're highly engaging, but they're kind of like very topical first focused. And I mentioned the one in Miyuyao. He also mentioned the brief history of a masseuse, an elderly masseuse that he had met in Boracay, and he found him in an area that was largely oppressing, one of the more interesting people in the community. Well, I want to suss out more from the life of that guy, or even if it's people that you don't like some of the expats in Boracay. Find some of them that have some interesting backstories, not as generalities, but as specifically like these kinds of people. But anyway, if you can kind of think of the book more focused from a philosophical angle, from the way, you know, things interact in a general sense rather than like stories of people, then this is really an interesting book. Colin is my friend. I should say that. You know, I think I can reasonably say that. So check out his book. It's very, very readable. As I said, it's a little bit encyclopedic, but like the most interesting articles that you could ever read, and just really kind of fascinates the mind and thinks why we do these things. So, you know, or why we don't do certain things, or how we're affected by marketing, and just all sorts of great stuff like that. So anyway, come Back Frayed by Colin Wright. All right, see you guys. Keep checking out my reviews. Bye.